This video is going to be a little bit different from what I usually do. I want to talk today about the philosophy of Fallout, more the way philosophical movements influenced Fallout. I am not a philosopher. In fact, I find most philosophy is just pretentious bullshit. But I do love history, and I have read a bit on the development of different philosophical movements in Western history. So I want to talk about philosophical movements and how they apply to what is my favorite video game series. But I also am trying to do so from the outside looking in, like a historian studying past movements. Here's where some pretentious asshole tells me I can't look outside since I'm influenced by a philosophical context as much as anyone else. Look, I know, but that's not helping anyone. Anyway, to understand Fallout, to really understand it, I think you have to understand modernism, postmodernism, and post-postmodernism. Fallout 1 and 2 are postmodernist works. Fallout 3, 4, and New Vegas, and the show, are all, in varying degrees, meta-modernist works. Well, let's look at what that actually means. First, just a clarifying point, modernism is not the same as modernity. Modern society just refers to the last 500 years since the end of the Middle Ages. Modernism is a specific artistic and philosophical movement that emerged in the first half of the 20th century. It was a reaction against Romanticism, and it was, in a lot of ways, a continuation of the Enlightenment. Modernism saw science and progress as ways to improve the material conditions of people's lives, saw logic and reason as ways to both solve problems and to discover truth. Modernism was pro-capitalism. It saw capitalism as working alongside human nature to again improve people's material conditions. Most importantly, though, modernism saw things like truth and meaning as being universal. The modernist views meaning as an immutable trait that can be discovered, and once discovered is the sole meaning. All other attempts to impose meaning are incorrect. In Fallout, the pre-war world kind of represents the modernist world. The hyper-capitalist and hyper-patriotic pre-war world are worlds where economic growth was the driving force behind everything, and those in power seek to impose their worldview onto others violently if necessary. This is what Liberty Prime is all about, right? Spouting patriotic lines as it shoots lasers and throws nukes at people. However, and this is really important, Fallout is not a modernist story. The pre-war world fails precisely because of its modernist nature. The hyper-capitalism leads to energy and resource shortages. Their attempt to impose a single truth leads to the destruction of the entire world. Tim Kaine famously said that Fallout was not a critique of capitalism, except that's not really what he said. He said it was not a critique of capitalism because it shows communism being bad also. I want you to remember that because it's going to come back up later. It's also important, as we move forward, to remember this is all about the Cold War context. Remember that 1997 was only 6 years after the end of the Cold War. Almost everyone playing Fallout 1 back then remembered the Cold War to some degree, and that context is likely lost on younger players who just don't remember it. If we understand the Cold War in modernist terms, it was a battle to determine absolute truth, the absolute truth of two ideologies, and that's reflected as well in the Great War of the Games. Postmodernism is a critique of modernism that emerged after the end of World War II and came to dominate thought by the end of the 20th century. Postmodernists did not exactly reject modernism in its entirety, but rather saw modernist search for universal truth as futile, as they believed universal truth did not exist. Postmodernism says the world is just chaos. The world lacks any overarching structure. Instead, you have powerful people attempting to impose their worldviews onto others, and that's what creates structure. Postmodernists would argue there is no universal truth or meaning. Even what the creator intends is not the end of the analysis of the meaning of the work. Indeed, it may not factor in at all. These grand unifying theories of modernism were, according to postmodernism, merely single ideologies swimming in a sea of other ideologies. No one had any more claim to absolute truth, but rather they formed a narrative by which its participants and believers gave meaning to the world in their own minds. Many of the postmodernists saw any attempt to impose one single meaning as akin to fascism or totalitarianism. Instead, the postmodernists saw diversity of worldviews and the ability of readers, viewers, or players to create their own meaning. The audience created that meaning through their narratives. There's not one meaning, but rather what meaning is how we interpret it to be. Postmodernism tended to be anti-capitalist. Postmodernists saw capitalism as contrary to human nature, in contrast with the modernists. More than that, though, they saw it as destructive to human nature. They saw capitalism as an artificial power structure, a hierarchy imposed onto people by those with capital, in which individuals without capital were unable to thrive. In both of these ways, the postmodernists view modernism as a scam. Modernists, they believe, promised liberation through the finding of meaning, but actually oppressed the many by putting power in the hands of the few. The other key to postmodernism was the use of irony to deconstruct modernist assumptions. Irony is all about juxtaposition between what's expected and what's presented. Fallout 1 and 2 are postmodernist. There is no true society. We see different visions of society competing. We see Shady Sands offering one possibility, a small tribal village, the later a liberal democracy. Vault City, though, offers another, a stratified yet technologically advanced aristocracy. The Master's Unity offers yet another, the Master's vision of a super mutant society. Even the pre-war world is just one more ideal of what society could be. There's nothing really special about it, hence why war never changes and the details are trivial and pointless, as the intros say. And that's the significance of Tim Kane's comment. He's not just talking about capitalism and communism, but how both are just competing ideologies that have positives and negatives and have different meaning according to who you ask, and that's postmodernism. I should specifically mention the Enclave. They're not just the remnants of pre-war America. They're an interpretation of pre-war America. America itself in Fallout has gone through a sort of reinterpretation. I mentioned how irony was used to deconstruct modernist tropes. Postmodernist irony is the entire point of using the 1950s as an aesthetic. The style of dark humor in these two games is entirely different from the style found in later entries. It's not slow-mo kill cam set to calm music, it's much more transgressive. The ray gun gothic atom punk aesthetic is meant to evoke positive, even naive visions of the future, but then the game gives us a dark apocalyptic future. The future they show is worse than today, not better, and in a sense, that's far more realistic. It's important to note, irony is not wacky humor. Irony is done with a point, and not everything in the game has to be ironic for what I'm saying to be true. I'm talking about how the game uses irony to deconstruct modernism. Don't take away that I'm saying nothing in this work is serious. Indeed, much of the game is taken straight for the dark horror aspects of the wasteland. The important takeaway is that the first two games use irony in a specific postmodernist way. Actually, Scott Campbell, one of Fallout 1's lead designers, talked about this on an old post on No Mutants Allowed. He talked about making sure parts of the game didn't get too wacky. He said, "I wanted the game to seem brutally real. The player should feel that the world is out to get them. There's no safety and you can't trust anyone. Any false step could be your last." And that meant some of the team's zaniness didn't work well. Most of the humor stemmed from the dialogue. It's that dialogue where you really see the postmodernist irony coming out. The game takes the threat of the wasteland seriously. It uses irony to explore the real-world subtext. The horror of the game is played entirely straight, but the humor is mostly ironic. The games are as much about the real world as they are the fictional world the creators have created. In Fallout 2, a lot more of the humor is fourth wall breaking, which makes the postmodernist irony more obvious. Look at the President of the Enclave, a clear parody of the first President Bush, with a vice president that spouts real quotes from VP Dan Quayle. Something like The Hubologists is a clear example of that too. There's real-world subtext there that makes a statement about power structures. Another good example might be the conversation with the Enclave communications officer. You don't expect to be able to prank call the villains, and you certainly don't expect to be able to have a pleasant chat with them until you say the wrong thing. But the irony humanizes the Enclave in a way. It makes you realize these are humans, driven by a specific ideology, trying to shape society into what they want, the same as all the other factions. This was apparently important enough that it got its own talking head in the game. One final example before I move on. The She get accused of being racist stereotypes, but I think that misses the point of what the developers were trying to do. They're not a stereotype, they're an ironic deconstruction of a stereotype, and that says something about media. The She act like they're in an old kung fu movie because that's their only frame of reference for what Chinese culture was. And that should make the player think about the role that media we consume plays and how we view foreign cultures. I'm not saying it was handled in the most sensitive way, I'm just saying writing it off as an old outdated portrayal of a foreign culture misses that it's supposed to be that in-universe to make a point out of universe. That's irony used for deconstruction, and that's postmodernism. The games do use music in the opening scenes to contrast the mood of the songs with the horrors of the wastes. This is postmodernist irony as well. The games use music ironically because the tone doesn't fit what's about to happen. The 1950s music evokes this rose-tinted nostalgia, but then we see a dark and violent future instead. Although to be fair, Maybe's lyrics do fit the ending of the game, but you don't know that going into the beginning. One criticism of the postmodernism of the games comes from the 90s context, the neoliberal consensus that had been communally agreed upon since the end of World War II, but especially since the Cold War ended, definitely bleeds through. The NCR is played as sort of a quote-unquote good faction, and they are a neoliberal democracy that opposes slavery and fights for equality for mutants. There was this assumption baked into society at the time the games were made, and yet that gets deconstructed later in New Vegas. If you want to see the fate of democracies, look out the window after all, but I'm getting ahead of myself. There's an element to Fallout's deconstruction of the Western genre as well. The Western is the quintessential American narrative, and Fallout deconstructs it beautifully. The wasteland is like a dark reflection of the frontier, even starting in the West and going east instead of the other way around. Unlike the Western stories of old, more like real westward expansion, the West is not this clean and sanitary with Marshall Dillon riding in a clean shirt to save the day. Instead, people generally, as in humanity, are at its worst. The player does act like an old Western hero, though, rolling into town to solve problems, but the actual result may be mixed depending on your playthrough. Oh yeah, and there's also aliens. Yeah, they're aliens. Again, they were meant to be ironic. They were there because they don't fit. Again, remember that for later. I'm going to cut it off here for part 1, so that's modernism and postmodernism. In part 2, I'm going to talk about the next step, which is the horribly named post-post-modernism.